Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Amber Peterson. I'm with Permian Peterson Associates, and we believe that building a culture inside creates public trust outside. And as a part of our public safety culture tips, I am bringing with today Bob Jacobson, retired police chief and public safety director, first retired out of New Brighton, a host of other roles after that in retirement, right? Many of you have probably been there before, or some will be. Over 33 years in law enforcement, though. So he's got a lot of great wisdom to share with us today. And I'm so happy to have him here with us. Thank you, Bob, for being here. You had a number of roles, but besides being police chief and public safety director in New Brighton and multiple roles after that, lots around mentoring and support, though. And so could you talk a little bit about how you fostered a culture of support in the agencies that you led?
Well, thanks, Amber. First of all, again, thanks for having me talk today. Second of all, just know that we had some successes in the agencies I work for, including New Brighton. I worked with the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association, the Department of Human Services as the Inspector General, and my last job was with Stillwater Police Department as the interim chief. So you could probably say I was a failure at retirement. But I'm trying. But I was fortunate to work with really great people in all of those agencies, great staff who were very forgiving of the mistakes and the faults that I may have had. One of the things I was taught early on, and it came initially from my father, who was a longtime educator, school administrator for many years, but he taught me the importance as a teenager, and he talked about the we versus me. And the discussion he had with me as a young man, and it took a while for that to sink in, of course, but that, we need to think in greater terms, that as we go through life, we should be thinking less about the individual, about us. We should be thinking more about what kind of an impact we can have on others around us. So it's really a story of we as we go through life, and the success of we or organizations rather than the personal success. And I think that was really important. And that's one of those tenets that I hung on to. I wasn't perfect at it, made mistakes, but I think I tried to make sure that would resonate through the agencies that I work for.
Absolutely. I love that. We versus me. And how simple is that, right? To shift your mindset and your focus to impact and how you show up in the world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think, again, it's not always an easy thing to do. Oftentimes the first response as we're going through life or going through, even difficulties or changes in life. We always think about how it might impact us personally, and certainly that's important. But I think if we can always work to try to consider that bigger picture, that we, how we can make things better around us, I think that really has a huge impact. And so that people know you care about them too, that really can move through an organization as well and be genuine about it.
Yeah, genuine. That's the word that stuck out to me too. Authentic, right? Authentic
Absolutely.
and genuine. And people know when you're not being genuine and authentic, and it makes a negative impact. Now, I'm curious, as you led with this mindset of we and impact, did you get resistance from anyone? And if you did, how'd you overcome it?
Well, absolutely. Anytime there are some changes in organizations or different approaches or reorganizations, what have you, it can create some anxiety, within organizations. And and of course, the old adage is that police officers and those in public safety really want change, except when they don't want change. And so so different approaches can sometimes bring on some anxiety within organizations, and it's about culture. Organizations and professions have cultures that are built in sometimes and baked in that can be really difficult to change if you think that there's that need. Oftentimes when I was training and teaching with the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association, and I was talking about culture, I'd share the story about how, as I started as a young police officer in 1983, which is before a lot of you were probably even born. But the culture when I walked into that agency, shortly after I started, within a few months, probably just within a few weeks, a more senior officer took me aside and told me that within 6 months I would be drinking heavily, I would be smoking, and I would be more than likely cheating on my wife. And I
Mm.
use that story to illustrate that the culture of law enforcement, the culture of some agencies at that time may have been not a big focus on wellness and taking care of yourself. It was a culture that really wasn't something that was very inviting to come into as a young police officer at times. I think that's changed, and I think we're still changing that culture. That when we come in, again, to embrace the service model, and that this is a calling and it's a profession that's very noble. But with those changes, it takes some time and it takes some hard work. So certainly there were always some obstacles to overcome. Probably the best example of some changes that I helped work through in the career that I had, and especially in New Brighton, was a transition from separate police departments and fire department to a public safety approach.
Mhm.
And we took that on, and very early in my time as the police chief and then director of public safety, where we needed to combine organizations, the police and firefighters, together under one umbrella. And that was a huge change, both for the law enforcement personnel and for the firefighting staff,
Mhm.
and certainly encountered some anxiety and some questions through that whole process. Um, but at the end of the day, now, if we look back, that organization has been in place for about 21 years, and is functioning extremely well and doing a great service for the city of New Brighton. But we certainly had some bumps in the road and some missteps as we moved through that change.
I can imagine. So, like you said, change can bring anxiety because it's different. And truly, our brains want consistency. It's important to support people through those changes. But it sounds like that it's after 21 years, it's still going, it's going strong. That's lovely to hear for New Brighton and important.
Really some of the keys to that, a lot of hard work and time, but FaceTime, being upfront with
Mhm.
the staff and the personnel that are a part of this transition and this change. You can't make change from sitting behind a desk, behind a computer in an office. You have to get out, you have to be present, you have to be there, you have to be available. And a big part of this, and anytime there are some changes that are being made, and that was certainly a huge one, um, but you've got to spend time with people. And they're the formal meetings that are always important to have with staff to explain the changes that you may be making. But I found probably the best meetings and the best face-to-face time that I would ever have are the times around the water cooler, around the coffee pot, around in the lunchrooms, where you can have one-on-one or one-on-two FaceTime with with staff to help allay any fears, to become just another person with them, and to talk about life and to talk about the important things that may be going on with them, in addition to what might be happening within the organization. And I think that personal touch from leadership, those informal times with staff, including again just time to talk about things other than work, helps allay some of those fears. You have to get to know each other. You have to build levels of trust so that people, staff will hopefully believe together in the changes that we're making.
Mhm.
And I always tried to make changes incrementally. That was one of those things that didn't want to leave on a Friday afternoon and then come back on Monday with wholesale change to organizations or to policies. Bring them along, keep people informed. I like the good to great analogies, and in good to great they talk about kind of plodding along through those changes. You're determined. You want to make changes within an organization, but they certainly don't have to happen all overnight. And I always kept that in mind. And remember, even if there were questions or some anxiety, keep that humility about me, especially, that knowing that even if there's some pushback, it's not about me. It's about the organization and making people comfortable with the direction we're going.
As a part of that, what struck me was that even in the face of uncertainty, you can give people a known commodity in your support and the way that you support them and the way that you show up or the way that they can approach you, even in informal situations. So I think that's really some magic right there, I would say, in order to create that culture of support.
Absolutely. And as you see that, and that permeates through the organization, and it works both ways. Through the organization to the staff level and back up and out to the community. I
Mhm.
mean, if you are paying attention and working with your staff, your police officers, your firefighters, those that are in public service, and they know that you care about them and that you want to work with them, that permeates right back out into the community, where it becomes less of us versus them. Again, back to that that we're not in this, as an adversary. We're in this together with the community, to do the best possible job that we can for them. Certainly in my personal life, along with professional, there were times where things happened in my life where staff really came back to support me. I had my first wife died by suicide.
Mhm.
And one of the things that had permeated through the organization up to that point, again, was that spirit of taking care of each other, really kind of the early beginnings of that wellness piece. And staff just reacted so supportively, through some of those terrible traumatic times that we all go through. And so that came back to me, you know, certainly to help us move forward through the organization and through the traumatic times in my life. And we could do that for others. And so again, there's just a lot of good that can come out of approaching leadership and approaching organizations um, with a great deal of humility, a lot less ego, and a lot more of how can we accomplish things in the spirit of we.
Yes, yes. And thank you for sharing that. Uh, it is so important to remember we're all human and we all have things that happen in our lives. And now I'm talking to the chiefs out there, fire chiefs, police chiefs. Maybe you're a leader in a corrections organization. You're a human too, and you have things that happen in your life. And so, how can you get support as well as a part of this? So, just planting the nugget, planting the seed. So, how did you? Um, Communicate those expectations down, and I'm thinking about how you worked with your leadership team, and then you did mention a little bit about explaining things out to people across the organization, but could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And of course, as you know, communication is the key in all of this. Again, if you sit behind a desk in your office and you think everybody knows what you're thinking, they don't. And if there's a vacuum, they're going to come up with their own explanations for why you're doing things. And so you want to make sure that there's not a vacuum of information that's going back and forth with your staff and your supervisors. And you know what I eventually settled on, starting in New Brighton, and I use this through with the Inspector General's office and the Department of Human Services, and with Stillwater Police Department. Um, Number one, there was always communication with, obviously, with their supervisors, with staff, command level, regular meetings, regular opportunities to make sure to talk about what we were doing well, where we can improve, making sure that the message was being delivered. But beyond that, staff and organizations need to hear on a continual basis what you think and how you see the organization moving forward. Messages just delivered once or twice or three times are not nearly enough about how you would like to lead the organization. And I mentioned Some Good to Great, the book and those theories, but I used that a lot, and started to share some of those leadership lessons and humility and less ego moving forward, in weekly messages. And so, to make sure that throughout the organization, everyone was getting the same message, and receiving the same information, began sharing weekly messages in written form every week. And by the time I left in New Brighton, we had done over 400 straight weeks, never missed a week, where there would be a message that would go out on leadership, on some of the things that our expectations were on how to move the department forward. And we'd highlight those examples of what we wanted to see and what we like to see by sharing those on those weekly messages. So if police officers, firefighters, or staff did something that really exemplified the spirit of leadership, the spirit of helping others and taking care of each other, we would highlight those in those weekly messages. And part of it too is keeping contact with our staff and those important events in their life. So part of those messages would include, birthdays and wedding anniversaries and babies that are being born, that personal touch, so the people knew, and we're paying attention. We cared about what was happening in their lives. So those messages will go out every week without fail. And in fact, the current director of public safety in New Brighton, Tony Pasnick, has kept up that approach, and they're nearing 700 straight weeks. So that message will go out to everyone all at the same time, just to reinforce what we were already talking about at the water cooler, at the coffee pot, in those formal meetings, those informal meetings. And I think that really resonated and still does, with members of those organizations. And there should never have been any question about how we felt about our mission, about where we were going, about how we should approach our work, and that we cared about each other.
Wonderful. And what I love about that is the stories. So people really resonate with stories, and especially when you are telling stories about what people are doing that you want more of, and versus telling the majority of the stories about what you don't want. So it's when we talk about communication and setting expectations, communicating expectations, you hit it all. It can't just be once or twice. It needs to be consistent and often. Yeah. Very often across all boards, and talking with people over and over again about the same expectations, right? And the key messages are the same. We are consistent in the message we're sending across and down, and as well as that we're telling stories about the things that people are doing really well and that we want to see more of. What other advice do you have for leaders who are working to increase support across their agencies?
I think the number one thing for me has been to make sure that you're approaching the position and approaching the work. There's almost a spiritual theme to approaching law enforcement and public service. That it's a calling, that it's that those positions are honorable positions within our communities, and that as leadership, that we look at our work as that higher calling, that there's real meaning behind what we're doing each day. You can make a difference in your own little corner of the world, and you do it each day. And you do it, when you're dealing with most often people in the worst moments of their life. Sometimes we can view that as just another call in the day. To that person or that family that's calling us, that may be the worst day that they've had so far in their life. And so for us to refocus that, each time we make that contact, each time we approach this job, there's a higher calling. There's really, more that we can do as we approach those calls, and to keep in mind that we're there and we can really make a difference in that moment in time for that person or that family or that group that's calling us that needs help. So I think for our leadership to really embrace the idea that there's really a spiritual approach to this, and I'm not talking religious, but I'm talking that there's a higher calling to the job that we do. And if you believe that, your staff is going to believe that will go throughout the organization. And as they deal with each other, as they deal with others in the community, they keep that in mind, that this is really important. Lastly, I would suggest to all of our police chiefs and leadership out there that, and they know this intuitively, but keep up those personal contacts. If you're a leader, whether it's a big organization or small, and I've worked in organizations with 20 some police officers to organizations with over 300 staff. And it's the same between both organizations. They need from leadership that personal touch. You need to walk around, you need to meet with people, you need to talk to people, you need to be there at the good times in their life, you need to be there at the bad times in their life. Make yourself available. And so I think those personal connections, that consistency of messaging, the belief that what we do um, can make a difference in our corner of the world, and that the professions and the job that we are in, the tasks that we're performing um, are so important to the fabric of our society, um, for our communities to feel safe, for our communities to feel good about what we do and how we serve. Um, that's just so important. And so I think, as leadership, if we can demonstrate that we believe in that, that we really do believe in that we share that with our staff, we make ourselves available. Um, I think that can make all the difference in the world. And they'll be forgiving of the mistakes that you make too. As an organization, um, police chiefs, fire chiefs, we all make mistakes. And the difficult part for us when we do that is to admit that we've made them. So I think there are times when we need to be able to say, I'm sorry, that was a mistake, and we're going to do better. And we expect that from the staff that we work with within our organization. That expectation from them should be for us as well. That when we've made a mistake, when we could have done something better, just to say it, we're human, and we will make mistakes.
I love that last note here. Modeling, model, model well, model the things that you want to see in your staff, and you'll get what you want out of that. So
Absolutely.
absolutely. Oh, thank you so much today, Bob. I just really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your wisdom from your years of experience as a successful leader across multiple agencies, I would say. So with that, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber.
And if you have any questions or comments, you're curious how to bring these tips to your agency, please reach out. I'm going to keep our contact information in the comments. And we're happy to talk with you about how to start bringing more of a supportive culture or increasing your supportive culture in some way in your own department. With that, thank you so much for joining us today. Take care and be well.